All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of Healthcare IT Unplugged. I am today's host, Sean Jackman. I'm the founder and CEO of Clinical Mobility. And today we have an exciting guest, a friend of mine as well. And I would say, some Dennis Holmes is one of the wireless industry's veterans. Dennis, would you please just give the audience a little background about yourself, title, where you work in, and what makes you tick?
So I'm Dennis Holmes. I'm the Senior Technology Advisor for Mobility at Internetwork Engineering. We're headquartered in Charlotte. And about 85 to 90% of my wireless practice revolves around healthcare. Been doing it for roughly 20 years now.
So for those of you who know me, now you know why I get along with Dennis. Because we have, when we see each other, we share a lot of war stories. We have very similar passions. And I'm going to tell you a story. I don't know if I've told you this, but this was, 20 years ago, maybe. I was working for a reseller, and there was a Cisco Partner VT conference. Remember those partner VTs go to? So I went to my first one. And, it's probably a room of 100, 150 people or so. And there's this old boy with a Southern accent, and he was pretty vocal for actually a lot of, whenever there were questions, there was always one hand. There was always that was up, and it was you. And I said, I got to talk to this guy. I love how you're outspoken, and all of the manufacturers know you, and sometimes that's a good thing because you do rattle cages. And you have and you speak a lot of the stuff that we all think in the room, and I've always appreciated that about you. But I'm not sure I ever told you that story. But it was funny. You and I became I first met at that.
And those partner VTs were kind of a come together for a lot of folks that were early Wi-Fi veterans. I say there's a group of probably 20 of us that we still all talk, Sean. I mean, all of us. I mean, we still see each other, talk to each other. Been on trips together with folks out of those meetings. It's a really tight-knit community.
It is, as it should be. Well, you have a wireless. As you said, you do a large portion of your business in healthcare, but I think that some of the work you do outside healthcare, maybe there's some lessons learned there. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that today. But first, we've talked about where Wi-Fi is heading. Those of you who've seen previous episodes from our video podcasts, you've heard my perspective. Well, I'd like to hear yours. You've got a lot of background in this. You've studied this. You and I have talked offline. You're not short on opinion. So we want to hear it.
So you got to look back where Wi-Fi came from, right? Before it was Wi-Fi, when it was before it was even 802.11. We had standards that included infrared. We had all sorts of cool standards, and we've evolved. And what I always hear is, why do I need to build more bandwidth? Well, if I build it, somebody will come up with an application or a solution to leverage that bandwidth. So what I've seen over particularly the last few years is we have moved from 802.11n, which I consider the last big paradigm shift in wireless as we moved from older modulation technologies to newer, and therefore better throughput.
Okay.
What we looked at was the next big iteration for Wi-Fi for me was what we call Wi-Fi 6 or 802.11ax. And the reason for that is a lot of technical reasons. But again, what you get out of that is better latency, better reliability, higher throughput, the ability to better efficiently use the Wi-Fi spectrum, which we don't have a lot of in the United States until this year when 6E was evolved. And that's 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi. But what I've seen from Wi-Fi is it used to be just this common, cool thing to have. Executives had it, and now it is literally mainstream in every facet of our life.
Yeah.
And so along with that, it's grown with the cellular carriers as well.
And there's a couple of things you said there that I'd like to kind of reiterate. Those that have heard me talk have heard me say something. I think, in fact, I'm just going to ask you the question. So when do you think the speed problem was solved in Wi-Fi? At what standard that issue?
I would say it's probably never going to be fully.
Okay. Well, that's
fully
fair. But
solved, right? Because if I give somebody 40 gig of throughput, like I might get on a Wi-Fi 7, they're
which
going
we're
to
going to
find
talk about
something to
that.
use that with, right? They'll find something to use it with.
But was there a point in Wi-Fi's journey that we thought, man, we had all the naysayers saying, you know what, Dennis, this is a cute little, toy. It's kind of neat for a couple of users, but it'll never be as fast as Ethernet. Was there a turning point?
11N, right? I mean, 11N really took us there.
I
11N took us from doing, 10, 12 mega throughput, 50, 45 mega throughput up to, hundreds of mega throughput. So, and it was reliable enough at some point in time that yes, you could go wireless in an office without Ethernet cables if you needed to. So for temporary
Yeah.
offices, things that were put up, it was a good solution, and it's pretty reliable.
And you mentioned spectrum. We've been able to use this 2.4 gigahertz spectrum that almost is consumerized now. We all know kind of what that is. My mom knows what 2.4 gigahertz is now. And then there's this 5 thing. Is that 5G? So 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. H11n comes out, which is now retroactively referred to as Wi-Fi 5, right? So now Wi-Fi, actually, no, that's Wi-Fi 4.
It's Wi-Fi 4.
Yes,
So
thank
Wi-Fi
you.
5 was AC.
It was
Wave 1 and
AC.
Wave 2.
So exactly my point. We're going back and retrofitting, these standards. That's why I don't commit them to memory. Frankly, I think it's just a bunch of marketing fluff, and I don't really, I I want to be more exact anyway. That's how we all referred to them. But all we've had was 2.4 and 5 gigahertz to date. So when we come up with these new protocols, do you think they've had a major impact? As these standards have evolved, we went from even H11A all the way up to AX today?
I do, and I'll tell you why. Because as we became a more mobile civilization, a more mobile society, the advent of smartphones and tablets put in everybody's hands, and the demand for more bandwidth on those devices required, when you were inside your home or inside the building, to have the speeds to be able to supply those. And with that, what we did is we've grown that spectrum. So it's really a valuable spectrum when you think about what we've done with mobility. I look at now what I have in my hand in a phone compared to what I had from a laptop, say back in 1994 or 95.
I venture to say the laptop you're using is probably not much thicker than your phone.
It's not. I'm using a pretty lightweight laptop, and reality is I can do just about everything I do on my laptop I can do on my phone now.
Yeah. So what's changing in the standards? We talked about Wi-Fi 6E, and that's going to be leveraging 6 gigahertz. What does that mean to you? And how do you think that's going to translate to business benefits, like in the healthcare realm?
So it actually gives us the spectrum we need to do some things. So when you look at business use cases, I tell folks, wireless networks are purpose-built networks. Now, I've got to have them set up kind of as a Swiss Army knife, so to speak, in a hospital environment. But in a lot of cases, I would love to have the flexibility to use more bandwidth where I need more bandwidth, particularly radiology areas, areas that are going to be sending large packets, large frames, large files across the network. But I also need to have the ability to limit, interference and problems from the spectrum. Yeah. And with 6E, with 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi, I now have that additional 59 channels. That's huge. That's a game changer.
59 channels is a monster amount of. Does that present any new problems?
And it poses problems in its own right. Now that we've got so many channels, how do controllers scan those channels for interference when you're scanning across now roughly 90 channels? How
does a client device scan that many channels when it needs to roam? It's looking for a new access point, and how does it know about, it's on this one channel out of such a large set?
And that has a lot to do with again, IEEE standards. There's a lot of standards that have been written around helping with roaming and assisting with roaming, particularly high-speed roaming. And then to throw another crux into that, what if I need to roam from a Wi-Fi network to a LTE or 5G network and back and forth because I'm walking in or out of the building? So, one of the things that IEEE 1932.1 has done is introduced an architecture for a licensed, unlicensed controller that's like a small piece of software, runs on the client device and determines what's the best connection, right? Those are cool things that are coming.
Very cool. Yeah, and then there's open roaming. In the cellular world, if you've got a mobile phone and with it's been known by other things, right? For sure, Hotspot 2.0.
Call it what you will.
Yes, but the use case is you're in the macro cellular network and you're walking into a building that maybe the cellular coverage indoors isn't very good, but there's a Wi-Fi network. So how do we roam seamlessly onto that Wi-Fi network without having to go, I got to open a web browser. Wait, I got to do an acceptable use policy, which, by the way, why are we still doing that?
Right.
I mean, okay, that's another separate topic. Wait,
that's a whole separate conversation. We could go on for an hour on that.
But it would allow, how does it relate to that technology that we've been messing with for quite some time?
So it's kind of that hotspot 2.0, open roaming. These are all different technologies to basically accomplish the same thing, which is a high-speed roam back and forth, right? So how are we actually going to do that as we move forward? That's not really all the way baked out yet because there's a lot of competing things out there. What the IEEE tried to do was just create an architecture that both of these technologies kind of adhere to, but also in a secure manner, right? So securely being able to roam back and forth.
So
and
when you're on a guest Wi-Fi
network,
when you're on a guest Wi-Fi network, what is the security policy typically?
So traditionally, you get an open network, you get a terms and conditions page, and boom, you're off to the wild, wild west, right?
And when an open network, I mean, what can somebody do with that? When it's open, if I had a laptop here with a free downloadable wireless tool, what can I get if I were to listen into your communication?
Oh, I could get a whole lot of things, right? I mean, securing your Wi-Fi network is really important today. Yeah. I think probably one of the biggest security vulnerabilities we have as a society is the fact that we all love Wi-Fi and we love to connect to any open Wi-Fi access point we see anywhere, in an airport, in a coffee shop. And not all those that are in those airports or coffee shops are actually access points hanging on the ceiling. So, we're seeing a lot of that.
So where do you think the business benefits are going to come with, let's say, Wi-Fi 6E? It's our first Wi-Fi standard that's going to leverage this new wireless spectrum that, there were some incumbents of that, but so we're a secondary tenant. But if we're indoors, we should be fairly well shielded from a lot of those protection mechanisms that might limit us. But we also have so many channels. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think, the big difference is, you were limited by channels. You had basically 3 channels you could use in 2.4. You had 20 some channels you could use in 5 gigahertz.
Now you've got 11 channels in 2.4.
Yeah, well, but only 3 non-overlapping. We won't get too down into the technical RF or in the weeds on non-overlapping 20 megahertz channels.
Just poking the bear.
But what we do have in this new spectrum is we have 59 20 megahertz channels that are non-overlapping. So
people don't appreciate this. We have to put a slide into this in the post process just to give you a visual. So you just talked about 3, and then you're going into, if we were to leverage all of Uni 2, which is now Uni 2 extended, or Uni 2C, B and A. What is that? 20,
24
in mid 20s.
Yeah, 24 roughly.
I would argue some of those channels less favorable, but you were in that. Now we're more than doubling.
Right. So now we're taking, 59 channels in what we call 6 gigahertz, which is basically, high 5 gigahertz to low 7 gigahertz spectrum. So it's encompassing.
People don't appreciate just how massive that chunk of spectrum is.
So think about a hospital that has 400 access points on it in the hospital. You're only going to have channel reuse now maybe 7-8 times throughout the whole hospital. So virtually eliminating co-channel interference if you stay at 20 megahertz, yes, and significantly minimizing it if you go to 40 megahertz channels. So it's a game changer.
Will it be more reliable?
I think it will be, because what you're going to have is Again, you're going to have that clearer channel. You're going to have less noise. Folks are going to be on the air, off the air quicker. So the noise floor is going to stay lower. So you're going to have higher data rates. But also, just the ability to not have that contention with another access point on the same floor is dramatically going to reduce packet retries.
Something I didn't hear you talk about, but I've heard you before, is what's happening at the protocol level at when we're using 6 gigahertz now compared
So
to
from a
kind of how we do
protocol
it today with
standpoint,
5.
the big thing for Wi-Fi 6 for me is, there's a lot of features in Wi-Fi 6 that are pretty cool. One of the most important things
6
is
or 6E or both.
both 6 and 6E. This is going to play on both. And what happens here is we've taken those 20 megahertz channels and we've now broken those down into subcarriers, like sub channels. And by doing that, we can, multi-use a single packet of information going across from multiple devices. Now, what does that do? That gets them on the air, off the air quicker. Again, lowering that noise floor, increasing that signal to noise ratio, which is the factor that determines your data rates. And once you've got those faster data rates, again, you're even getting on the air and off the air even quicker. So it's almost an exponential snowballing effect that the environment gets better based on some of the new technologies in the protocol. Another thing that's really driving healthcare, I think, and is going to drive adoption to Wi-Fi 6 and 6E relatively quicker than 11N was adopted, was target wait time. Once target wait time is supported in all the different access point technologies and the client devices, it's going to save battery life on client devices by a massive amount.
So I like your comment here. IoT, there's major benefits. There's a lot of things that just aren't very frequently used. But tell us a little bit more about what target wait time is and what that means to a radio and a battery.
So target wait time, basically every client device in the old world of Wi-Fi networking was constantly beaconing and letting the network know it was there, right? And waiting on a response. Target wait time basically allows devices that don't necessarily need to be on the network at all times to basically take a sleep or a rest, and they're going to get a triggering packet that's going to let them know, wake up, I got information for you, right? So what does that do? Battery life on those beacons on like a phone or a tablet was just drawing the life out of them. Really bad on infusion pumps, right? Or pulse oximeter devices. So they were battery life is, when these companies that manufacture these devices in the healthcare environment, they're competing against each other. One of the selling factors is our battery life lasts 3 times longer than our competitors.
Mm-hmm.
Those types of conversations. So it's a big deal. It's driving, the adoption of the standard much quicker than I think a lot of people expected it to do.
So we get more battery life out of our mobile devices.
Yep, a lot more. Exponentially.
Is there anything in this that you think is fluff, that's overhyped?
So a lot of the fluff that's out there, are the theoretical speeds, right? I mean, quite frankly, why do we need these theoretical speeds? I mean, I'm looking at what's coming on Wi-Fi 7 today. We're talking about 11BE under development and going to ratification, which is Wi-Fi 7. We're talking 40 gigahertz of throughput to a client device. Where would I ever need that
40
today?
gigabits.
40 gigabit.
Yeah.
And where would we ever need that? We're not going to probably need it with today's technologies, but with augmented reality and virtual reality, particularly around surgical suites and 3D imaging, there might be a use case where I need 1 or 2 access points that can be running at that level of throughput, whereas the rest of the hospital doesn't need to do that. So it's going to put a lot of emphasis on how we design networks in the future moving forward, because that's a critical piece.
And you call on something. I think there's an applied assumption in many cases, at least with today's wireless technology, to get these really high theoretical speeds that Dennis was talking about. We have to do what's called channel bonding. So we talked about all of these channels that we have available. Well, you can kind of clump them into operate sort of as one channel, and the trade-off is you're giving up usable wireless spectrum that would force you to reuse those same channels quicker and quicker. So you go back to this co-channel interference. It's like being in a room, a bunch of people trying to have conversations in a room that we can hear each other at a distance, and it affects the performance and the throughput. Do you agree with that?
I do. And when you start to look at, again, like the Wi-Fi 7 standard that they're working at today, if I'm looking at a 320 channel width, I mean, geez, look at the
320
number of channels.
megahertz. Yeah,
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 330
that's
megahertz
insane.
channel width. Look at the number of channels I'm using just to get that one connection for whatever devices around there that are going to support that. And there probably aren't very many of them that are going to.
It's I so we study this, and I know you study this too, because you just mentioned two use cases that are like potential to use a higher amount of bandwidth, but I can't find a use case that requires that kind of throughput. I mean, I haven't heard of one in any industry.
Not today. Not yet. Not
Well,
today.
however, if I were to tell you that your computer that's plugged into the wall, let's just use Ethernet as a simple analogy here, that if that's a 100 megabit connection or a gigabit connection, how many end users would honestly know the difference if the quality of that connection was good?
Very few, right? Nurses don't care. They just want things to work.
Yeah.
Doctors just want things to work. In a retail environment, your store employees, they just want things to work. One of the biggest demands on Wi-Fi networks on the planet are in universities and higher ed, right? Those kids expect everything on Wi-Fi to work, but they don't care about the speeds and feeds. They really don't. They just want to get a good, reliable connection.
So as I introduced in the beginning of this, there's always things we can learn from one industry, some best practices and some innovations that may impact another. What can healthcare learn from maybe education or some of these other market segments that you work in?
From an education standpoint, I think the biggest thing is how, we're starting to look at artificial intelligence and how it manages the networks and
Mm.
helps with what we call assurance, which is basically making sure the network stays stable and reliable. From a retail standpoint, I think healthcare can learn a lot from the customer engagement model done by most large retailers who they have to do really good customer engagement today to survive. COVID taught them that, right? People weren't actually going into stores, they were
Mm.
ordering online. Everything kind of became virtual. So now when folks walk back in the stores, you got apps that pop up and tell you you've got a coupon or whatever. From the healthcare standpoint, we could leverage that for things like automated appointment setting, managing operating room suites more efficiently.
So why
You know,
haven't we done that? The technology's been available. You and I have talked about it. We've probably each done deployments in this area. Why hasn't it taken off in healthcare where it has in retail?
well, I think ultimately what happened with healthcare has always been constantly driven around patient care, right? And patient care is more of a process within each healthcare organization. They have their processes and their workflows. What you look at in the retail is it's more not about patient care, but patient happiness and satisfaction. And that's the difference in simplification, making it easy for people to know when to come to the hospital because they've got a same day procedure that's going to be in the same day surgical suite. So knowing when to leave the house, how long it's going to take them to get there,
Hmm.
pulling all these different things together, ultimately improve the bottom line for the healthcare organization, but also improve the satisfaction for the patient because the patient's going to know what they need to do to get there. Uh, I see a lot of revenue that I feel like healthcare is always left on the table, right? I mean, everything from pictures of babies in nurseries to the in hospital pharmacy, things that you could reach out and touch the patient with while they're in the hospital from their mobile devices. It's marketing. It's hospital. It's healthcare
Yeah.
marketing, right?
So if I hear you right, you made a comment when you talked about retail that they had to do it to survive. Healthcare, it, I don't, I wouldn't call these business imperatives. I call these opportunities for distinction, for greater customer satisfaction, and some of these things. Would you agree with that?
I do, but I also understand that in a lot of cases, healthcare organizations are now competing for patients,
Yes,
just
they
like
are,
retail's competing for customers, right?
no doubt.
So what you can set yourself aside and make yourself, set aside your competitors is something that will attract people to your facility.
Well done. So on the topic of the post-COVID era, which I hope I'm not jinxing. I mean, knock on the table here for a minute because it feels like we are right now, at least as of April 7th, 2022. We're all working from home is the norm, at least to some capacity. And there's different, some organizations are going to be more on one side than the other. I would argue that it's going to be a blend at the very least, which most things in life, the patterns of things, they swing to one side of the pendulum, then they go to the other, then it's like where they usually eventually settle in the middle. What are some stories that you have on whether it's inside healthcare or even outside, again, because we can always learn things inside healthcare? What are some interesting stories you think that we could benefit from hearing your perspective?
So, when COVID hit, the one thing we saw were a lot of folks that were not patient care related folks within healthcare. They went home to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same way with our organization. We basically shut a brand new office that we had just built, and everybody worked from home. And there was the concern of whether or not we'd be as productive as we were, and would we be able to continue to business and actually retain the camaraderie that we had with folks. And we came up with ideas to do things like, after hours Zoom calls together as teams, et cetera. But what we did do is we worked from home. So everybody got an actual working phone that went to their house. It acted just like you were in the office. Your laptop was
like a desk phone.
like a desk phone. And we actually have desk phones. And we were able to do everything we needed to do from home. We saw that a lot across the spectrum of all industries, right? Healthcare did that, retail did that. Even it was huge with education. Setting up networks for kids to be able to take virtual classes. Zoom classes became a big thing, right? I mean, that was the big thing.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, my kids were just finishing high school, a couple of them, the younger ones, and college. And it's unfortunate. You talked about the social experience, and already with being online, were they already in playing video games and just seeing the interaction. They're not outside playing tackle football in the middle of the asphalt street like you and I did when we grew up, right? After school, you would be outside all the time and hanging out with your friends. That's gone, and now I feel like we're losing it in the office space.
We are, and you and I've talked about this before. I think there are places where remote working makes sense. For instance, our sales team, I don't see value in sales folks working remote. I think that person-to-person interaction is really critical. When I get down and talk to my customers, I love being able to go back and finally start to go see customers again.
Yeah, you and I just saw each other at HIMSS.
Yep. And if we hadn't, you look at how many of these trade shows that people just kind of discount that we go to, that really it's not the value of the information necessarily you get at the show, but it's the interacting and the networking with your peers and your customers that make a difference.
I'll admit that's one of the bigger reasons why I go to a lot of these, because the older I get, the more you realize it's who you know and how you support your network of friends and colleagues, right? And it's those connections that you do some of the most interesting things in your career, and also enjoy your job while building a community at the same time. One twist on this, you're putting technology in customers' homes, I would imagine, right?
Yes.
How are you helping them solve wireless at home? Wireless mobility for the corporate network, if you will.
So there's a host of ways you can do that, right? You can do hardware. We use some little small portable routers from different manufacturers that we can send home, and basically pushes the edge of the corporate network into the home. And some of those routers,
is that a managed device then at that point?
Yep, and it's a managed device at that point in time. In a lot of cases, we have our own NOC and our own support system, so we managed a lot of those for customers.
Mm-hmm.
All the way up to our C-level folks, right? Our C-level folks, when they moved home, we basically set them up home offices, and they were set up like just like they were in their offices at work. But also, as simple as potentially going down if They didn't get corporate issued gear. Uh, Installing VPN connectivity, getting
Yeah.
folks some way to connect securely back to corporate networks and corporate resources. And then a lot of things moved to the cloud. Uh, you know, uh, a lot of particular applications, particularly around email and things like that, moved to like Office 360 and 365 and those things. So we saw a lot of things move to the cloud, and we're like a hybrid cloud model. Some resources are still online at home, at the office or at the corporate data center, but some are actually hosted in the cloud now. So again, supporting hybrid cloud and doing it mobile is really changed the world. I mean, I look at where we were, that first VT you and I met. I remember probably it was that VT or the next VT. I got my first smartphone slash handheld, looked like a Palm Pilot PDA type
Oh, I
thing.
was going to say, this is probably, you're talking about BlackBerry at that point.
Yeah, so this was like 2005,
No.
right? So you sit there and you think about that, and you look at where we are today.
Oh, it's
Uh,
crazy.
it's crazy.
So what's in your home?
So I run a manufacturer's wireless LAN controller, uh, and then I run between 3 and 5 access points inside the house, and probably 3 to 5 outside the house. I live kind of in a remote area in East Tennessee. I mean, remote. It took me 5-6 years just to get a cable connection out here, so I wouldn't be working on a 1.2 meg DSL line. Yeah, 5 years. I nearly
Oh
died.
my
I thought I was going to die
goodness.
for 5 years. I had to go to a coffee shop just to get online. But now that I've got that, what's it done here on I've got a 22-acre farm. That's a horse farm. I now have video surveillance cameras all over the place. I have connectivity anywhere I want to go, except for the fact that I can't punch holes in my wife's crown molding or I die.
Yeah, I noticed the connection was a little spotty there in the beginning.
Yeah, I've got my closest AP is about a floor and a half away.
Okay. And so it's funny because being in the wireless business, it takes a whole lot of wired to deploy wireless to do it
Yes,
right.
it does.
And when it comes down to, ticking off your spouse, to run wire through and, blowing holes, and you don't always have easy access to this stuff. And so we kind of have to, make the best.
No. And I've actually outdoors, I was not allowed to punch holes through the wall to be visible. So I actually punched through the wall where our water line came through, and I buried cable out to a barn that's 600 feet away in 300-meter increments with a switch in between on a powered pole. So I actually have Ethernet at the far end where I can put
That's fantastic.
access points where the horses are.
Well, very good. Well, this was fun, Dennis.
It was.
What's something that only your inner friends would know about you that you wouldn't mind sharing?
Probably that I'm older than dirt.
No, I could tell that you're not.
And the older than dirt part, what I've learned is that I want to make sure that when folks you're in my age, when we leave this wireless business and this wireless industry, and we're going to in the next 5 or 6 years, I'm trying to build through a series of community colleges and technical schools a program to develop kids to come up and take our place that actually understand RF, not just the software piece that so many of the manufacturers drive down as being their big differentiators. Because quite frankly, if RF doesn't work, if layer one doesn't work, I don't care what code you put on top of that AP, it's not going to work.
It's a lost art, my friend. It's so sad that we have people running around calling themselves experts and they actually don't know RF. It's very frustrating to us as well as you.
And probably the other thing is, I'm kind of a guy that just does a lot of cool things with kids, and
that's great.
I coach kids into runners and those kind of things.
Well, Dennis, as always, it's always a lot of fun, and my hat's off to you. You've been a wonderful asset to our industry, and I see you passing the torch and doing some things to continue your legacy. I thank you and appreciate you, and
Thanks.
thank you for taking the time.
Thanks, man.